galaxy formation simulation. This is actually being done as we speak by many people in the world, and it might have an effect in shaping the galaxies. But all this with a grain of salt, obviously, because this is just happening right now. So this work is a work in collaboration with Michael Rieder, which is my PhD student in Zurich. He decided to stay in Hawaii, so he couldn't come here. So I'm here to basically speak about his work. So let me briefly remind you what about magnetic fields in the universe. So it's still an open question. What is the origin of magnetic field in throughout the cosmic history? And when something is still an open question, it's very hard to include it in your simulation, right? For obvious reasons, because you're not sure at what magnitude those fields will play a role in your galaxy. So what we know is that the most viable mechanism to generate the very first, very weak fields in the universe are Biermann batteries, basically microscopic processes occurring before and during ionization. And these microscopic processes, so-called Biermann battery effects, sets the scene, very, very weak field at the level of 10 to minus 20 Gauss. And then, if nothing happens, this field will slowly decay due to the expansion of the universe. So what we know today is that in local galaxies, we have fields of several microgauss, up to 10 microgauss. So we have an example of a nearby galaxy here with very detailed observation of magnetic fields. And we know that the mean field, so the field which is mostly toroidal along the spiral arm, is of the order of several tens of microgauss. But we also know that there is a turbulent field with respect to this mean field, which is roughly at the same strength. So that's what we know today. So there is actually a relatively recent observation from Francesco Mignati and other colleagues in Zurich, which is very puzzling. Because this observation tells us that the magnetic field in high redshift galaxies, redshift 4, 5, 6, was probably 10 times larger than the magnetic field in nearby galaxies today. And so this is a very robust measurement, and it means we are dealing with fields of the order of 100 microgauss, which in the picture of amplifying the field from 10 to minus 20 Gauss at ionization, let's say around redshift 10, all the way to a microgauss today, if you need to reach 100 microgauss of redshift, you're in trouble, right? Because then it means that magnetic fields are actually mostly decaying between redshift 6 and today. They are not growing, right? So it's clearly a very challenging observation. So now simulation-wise, so simulating magnetic fields in galaxies is a very, very old subject. But in the context of galaxy formation, I think the first simulation had been performed by Tom Abel, myself, in idealized simulations, where basically it was the so-called cooling halo setup. It's the same one I'm going to use today, where you form a dwarf disk with clumps, and the field, the initial field was set to a very weak value, but the field amplification that were observed in those galaxies, in those early simulations, was kind of weak. I mean, you can see here, there is basically 4 order of magnitude in energy amplification, which is considered at the time as being a lot, right? But actually it's not a lot. And this amplification is mostly due to the gravitational collapse of the halo into this tiny dwarf galaxy and some effect due to rotation. But there is no what we call a dynamo, right? And the main reason for that, as I will show you later, is that feedback effects were very weak in this early simulation. So now if you go to the traditional theory of galactic dynamo, it's a very old field, is traditionally governed by large-scale dynamos. So the picture that we all have in mind in galaxies is to have grand design spiral, very thin disk, relatively weak feedback, and in this environment, people try very hard to come up with a dynamo effect that could amplify the field exponentially, not like that, right? Really an exponential growth. And you have a lot of papers, and those are only the recent example, that obtained successful large-scale dynamo inside thin disks, but the growth rate was painfully reaching the same value as the rotation rate. So basically, one infolding amplification for a magnetic field was one rotation in the galaxy. So now if you want to go from 10 to minus 20 Gauss at redshift 10 down to a few microgauss at redshift 0, it's a very challenging thing to do with these theories, especially if you have this crazy recent observation at redshift 6. Yeah?
Wasn't the dynamo you described
The large-scale dynamo? No. So the large-scale dynamos, the only real problem is that they're slow. But otherwise, they are very nice observational properties. They compare very favorably with observations. Right? Yes, they gave those field reversal, the pitch angle. So, large-scale dynamo are very successful in reproducing low redshift galaxy properties. But the only bad point is that the growth rate is really slow. Right? So now there are some fundamental theoretical issues which are very interesting in the context of ideal MHD. You have the so-called anti-dynamo theorem, which tells you that if you have a planar axisymmetric flow, a galaxy, there is no dynamo possible. Okay? So the only way to have a dynamo is to explore the third dimension. And in the Milky Way, or in Grand Design Spiral, the third dimension is basically the thickness of the disk. So it's very small. And that's probably why those dynamos are so slow, because the information, in terms of field amplification, proceeds through the third dimension. It has to be in order to satisfy this theorem, but in a very weak way. Okay, so that's the picture. Here I left over many things. Okay, so now more recent simulations with MHD have been performed, especially because a lot of cosmological codes, galaxy formation codes, Gadget, Arepo, and Ramses, and ENSO, have been developed now with an MHD solver. And so it's very interesting to see that in the past few years, a lot of results have been obtained with very strong amplification mechanism. You can see here the magnetic pressure as a function of time, and this is basically a vertical line, many orders of magnitude, right? Much stronger than the early simulation we did with Ramses and ENSO. And then it reached basically the equipartition, so it saturates to a fixed value. Although the disk they had were also very thin, so here the anti-dynamo theorem applies, right? For very mysterious reason, they get this huge field amplification. So they don't really know what's happening, but the process that was proposed at that time is what is called small-scale dynamo. So it's a dynamo effect that occurs at very small scales, not on large scale like for the classical large-scale dynamo picture, but on small scales, on scales which are barely resolved by the codes. So, okay, I'm going to skip the numerical part here. I don't have much time, but the key point is that you can express your numerical scheme in a very nice way here. And the key take-home message here is that the equations are basically the ideal MHD equation plus a numerical correction or a numerical error, if you want, which is exactly like a diffusion operator. And the diffusion coefficient is proportional to the cell size, so you can define numerically what is called the magnetic Reynolds number, which measures the size of the system, or the divided by the resolution of your grid. And this is really like a diffusion, numerical diffusion with a Reynolds number, right? So the second take-away message from this slide is that you need to be able to separate the viscosity from the magnetic diffusivity. Those are two vector fields, and in nature they have two different diffusivity involved. But in the numerical simulation, it's always they are always equivalent, so that the Prandtl number, which measures the viscosity strength to the magnetic diffusivity strengths, are always the same. So the Prandtl number is usually always 1. Okay, so that's the take-away message from the simulation. Okay, so now if we move to galaxy formation, we know that we need feedback to explain this curve, and I will focus here on dwarf galaxies, in which supernova feedback is supposed to do the job. So what we did recently, like many other people, and we had plenty of talk in this conference, is to model the formation of a dwarf galaxy with strong supernova feedback, and what we obtained was a crazy turbulent object with very strong winds, with a galactic fontaine, very bursty star formation rate. And thanks to this feedback model, we were able to obtain, as many other people, the formation of a dark matter core. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to perform the exact same simulation with this feedback model, but with ideal MHD now. So basically the point here is that I'm not really interested in the feedback model. It's a lot of subgrid stuff. We don't understand a lot. But we need this kind of qualitative effect in order to observe the properties of a galaxy, for example, dark matter cores in dwarf galaxies. But now if I use this simulation and I will use the velocity field of this inside this simulation to evolve magnetic field, what do I get? Okay, so that's the experiment I did. So it's a very classical cooling halo setup. you have a side-on and face-on view of the gas here. So you see it's giant explosions, repeatedly blowing gas away. The gas is very turbulent in the center. You have a fontaine that fall back. If you measure the eta parameter, the mass loading factor at the Virial radius, in this case you find 0, because gas is not leaving the Virial halo here in this idealized setup. It's always falling back in and always repeatedly injecting energy into the system. And through supernovae, you have this highly turbulent, like washing machine, which is sustained. Okay? So now we initialize the magnetic field with a very, very low value, consistent with what we call the kinematic phase, which is that there is no feedback from the Lorentz force on the flow. So we are in a very well-posed problem in terms of dynamo studies. There is no feedback of the magnetic field on the flow. Right? We just want to let this galaxy evolve in this crazy way and see what happens to the magnetic field. Okay? And so we also use two different initial topologies. So the magnitude is following this flux freezing law initially. And then we explored two typical topologies, a dipole, which is a symmetric, anti-symmetric, sorry, with respect to the midplane, and a quadrupole, which is symmetric with respect to the midplane. Okay, so what do we get? So we explored two cases. First case, no feedback, or weak feedback, like we were doing before. And the second case, strong feedback, like the movie I just showed you. And so if you have strong feedback, you have a huge dynamo effect. So you see here the amplification is over 12 orders of magnitude, and it's still going on. So you have a really spectacular dynamo happening here. While in a no feedback case, you have what we obtained with Sturm and Yann Dubois a long time ago, which is that you have a 4-order magnitude amplification, and then it saturates because the field is completely toroidal. Okay? So now let's try to compare the two scenarios and see how we can explain this very strong amplification. So the no feedback case, you have a razor thin disk with some clump. You don't explore really the third dimension, right? And the turbulence is almost absent in this particular case here. So there is no little room for a dynamo effect, while in the feedback case, you really explore the third dimension massively. You have this huge fontaine flow and a lot of turbulence, which is seeded, injected by the supernova explosions. The key point is that the injection of turbulence here, the scale at which turbulence is injected, is the entire galaxy. Okay? So in the Milky Way, the scale at which turbulence is injected is the thickness of the disk. Okay? Here, for this dwarf case, the entire galaxy is the injection scale of turbulence. So that's the key qualitative and quantitative difference compared to the razor-thin picture we had in mind before about galaxies. Right? So high redshift galaxies are a very thick mess with large velocity dispersion and very large injection scales. So now you can quantitatively look at the velocity field. So the no feedback case, you have a velocity field which is basically a rotating disk and no vertical motion. While the feedback case, you have a highly turbulent scale, flow with a very large scale turbulent flow. Right? That's the key point, the large scale for the injection. And of course, the magnetic field that results from that is mostly toroidal and very structured in the no feedback case. It's a big mess in the feedback dominated case. Okay? So in terms of more, I would say, classical galaxy kinematic, you really disentangle the no feedback from the feedback case by looking at the rotational velocity versus the dispersion velocity. And the feedback dominated case, they have V over sigma order 1, and that's typically where you can have a strong dynamo, while V over sigma order 10, you typically have a weak dynamo or nothing. Okay, so let me go back. So that's the topology of the field. In the no feedback case, it's mostly a toroidal field. So all the field is in the theta direction. You have almost no field in the Z and in the R direction. So the amplification is mostly due to collapse and the disk. While in the feedback case, you have a mess. It's basically a white noise. You have magnetic energy at all scales, all the way to the injection scale. So now you can convert this into a power spectrum analysis. So that's the kinetic energy power spectrum. So this scale on the left is basically the size of the entire galaxy. That's our injection scale. And the kinetic energy is very stable over many gigayear. That's the source that we will use, the source of turbulence that we'll use to amplify the field. Now the magnetic energy power spectrum has a very particular shape with peaks at very small scales, and then it's a flat power spectrum with amplitude for the magnetic field which grow exponentially and goes to very large scale through the inverse cascade. So this theoretical process is actually quite well known from the theory of small-scale dynamo. You can read a recent paper here. And actually, this is for a numerical experiment which is made on a periodic box with forced turbulence, so pretty far from what we are doing. But the kinetic energy and the magnetic energy power spectrum are very similar to what we find. So I think it's a clear signature that we have a small-scale dynamo happening, except in their case, they force the turbulence artificially by some kind of ghost acceleration in the box. In our case, it's supernovae and gravitational collapse of the cooling halo. So, it's a very good question. Magnetic reconnection here is a key process. Okay, so that's the little stretch here, the little sketch here, right? The dynamo, this dynamo, the turbulent dynamo, works because you take a feed line, you stretch it, then you twist it, and then you fold it, and then you merge. And when you merge, you double the magnetic energy, right? That's the trick. Merging, what does that mean? It means the two feed lines here, they reconnect. Okay? And so reconnection is performed by the code at the grid scale. Reconnection is actually a perfectly fine physical process which helps you to capture the weak solution of the energy equation. Reconnection is like a shock, right? A shock wave in hydro, it's an unresolved feature which is driven by a microscopic process, but you're perfectly fine with shock waves in your favorite hydro code. Here, reconnection is the same, except it's not a shock, it's a reconnection sheet. And it's exactly the same thing that happens. So there is a connection in the code, it's perfectly fine, it's perfectly valid, and it's just the weak solution of the ideal energy equation. But reconnection is a key process in this dynamo scenario. Okay, I need to move on. Now, how does it depend on resolution? Actually, as predicted by the theory, it depends completely on the resolution. So you can see here three simulations we did of this turbulent disk by dividing the size of the cell by 2 each time. And you see the growth rate we measure depends completely on the resolution. And so if you move to smaller and smaller resolution, you basically get a vertical line, right? The growth rate is virtually instantaneous, right? I mean, the only limiting factor is how fast does this turbulence develop, okay? That's actually completely predicted by the theory, where the growth rate of the small-scale dynamo is governed by the dissipation scale. So that's the RMS velocity of the turbulence divided by the scale of the eddy you're considering to amplify the field. So this is the eddy turnover time scale, if you want. And so what is very interesting is that we find a critical resolution order 40 parsec, given our galaxy size, which is basically the turning point beyond which dynamo is possible and below which there is no dynamo. So there is a critical resolution, and if you don't satisfy this resolution requirement, you don't have a dynamo. And this is, again, perfectly in line with the theory of small-scale dynamo, where you expect a critical Reynolds number, and this was proven by those guys, for example. There is a critical Reynolds number around 35, which sets the onset of the dynamo, right? And so this is completely in line, and that's kind of reassuring. Yes? 5 minutes. Okay. So now there is a key. So again, as I said, this was done in the so-called kinematic regime. Kinematic regime, it means the magnetic field is so small that, okay, it's amplified, right? But it's still small enough that there is no feedback on the flow through the Lorentz force. So now we are obviously doing simulations where we study what is called the saturation. So now we start with a field which is large enough to start with, so that in a reasonable time we reach a Lorentz force which is strong enough to start influencing the flow. And we see a saturation, so the dynamo stops when the magnetic energy reaches a limit, and this limit seems to be independent on resolution, which is a few percent of the turbulent energy in our dwarf galaxy. So it means we are not at equipartition. We are below equipartition, right? And in terms of magnetic field, we are only at 10% of equipartition, and that's also a generic prediction of dynamos. So now let's speculate a bit. So now if we believe that this is true, basically small-scale dynamos, you have an almost instantaneous growth of the magnetic field. and it reached equipartition. And so if you believe that your dwarf galaxy is governed by turbulence equal the rotation speed, V over sigma equal 1, then you can estimate sigma and you can estimate the equipartition field. And you find this very simple formula that was proposed by other people, which is that for a dwarf galaxy at whatever redshift you prefer, you have 10 microgauss. So at redshift 10, you can have 1 milligauss for a dwarf galaxy, right? And again, for the galaxy itself, it's not very strong. Why? Because that's equipartition with the turbulent field, right? It means that very high redshift galaxies have a very deep potential well and they are very turbulent. Now, we know from the talks that we have seen during this conference that at redshift 2, roughly, we have a transition from active star-forming galaxies to dead quiescent galaxies. So now the question is, what happens in this scenario? And we haven't done the simulation to answer this question. But what we can speculate about is that the magnetic field, the turbulence will dissipate, the disk will become razor thin, and then the late time evolution, basically the magnetic energy will slowly decay, probably maintained by large-scale dynamos, which, as I said, are so successful to explain the properties of low redshift galaxies. So large-scale dynamos are actually not needed anymore to amplify the field, they are just needed at late time to build the properties of the galaxy. So now, 2 minutes. In order to test this speculation about the late time evolution of the field, what we did was a very simple experiment. We stopped the feedback at 3 gigayear in our dwarf galaxy. We turned feedback off. And then immediately, this highly turbulent, large magnetic-dominated atmosphere will collapse back to a thin disk. And here the question is, if we lose all the energy we have painfully accumulated over gigayears because of reconnection or destructive reconnection of fields, then the magnetic energy will basically dies out to zero, right? And actually what we find is that the magnetic energy is reconnecting, but the gravitational collapse of this corona, turbulent-dominated corona, is also compensating for the losses. And in the end, this experiment gives us magnetic field's energy, which is roughly constant. So this transition from turbulent-dominated to quiescent-dominated in this very simple experiment seems to survive and give a magnetic field which is large enough. So one interesting aspect of the simulation is that whatever initial topology we put in the field, after we suppress the feedback and this big turbulent corona collapses into a disk, no matter what we do, we always get a symmetric magnetic field. And this is very easy to explain, is because all the antisymmetric mode that we had initially in this turbulent corona will adapt destructively in the midplane, while the symmetric mode will adapt constructively. And so the generic prediction here in this picture is that you always should get, which is of course observed, symmetric fields with respect to the midplane. So I'm going to throw my conclusion here. So the key point here is that it all depends on how feedback evolves, and we are working hard on understanding feedback. What is very important, but again speculative, is that if you have equipartition, or if you are 10% of equipartition in these highly turbulent, high redshift disks, which is not a lot. 10% of equipartition is not a lot, right? But if you evolve into a razor thin disk by conserving roughly the magnetic energy, the field you get in the disk is huge. We're talking about huge fields with possibly a strong effect on galaxy properties. So this of course requires much more careful studies than this isolated disk simulation, but this is, I think, an interesting route for further thought. Thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 quick questions.
So basically what you're saying is that you need the feedback to drive the turbulence, and the turbulence drives the field.
You need a very peculiar turbulence. You need a turbulence which is injected on large scale. So that's the key point, right? Because traditionally, people know about the small-scale dynamo for a long time. Except in razor-thin galaxies, the small-scale dynamo is only for scales smaller than a few parsec. So it's irrelevant. But if your feedback is so strong that the injection scale is of the order of a few kiloparsec, then you completely change the picture, right? So the key point is injection scale of several kiloparsec.
Okay, so my question is, does it have to be feedback? Could it be any kind of energy distribution which is driving the turbulence? Does that give you the same kind of behavior?
Yeah, so that was proposed by first star people, for example. The problem with accretion and collapse is that turbulence collapses to smaller, the magnetic field, the amplified magnetic field is at smaller and smaller scales. So what you need is really to keep the field at the same fixed scale. And so that's the problem with pure collapse or pure accretion, is that the field is amplified on the way, I give you that, but the amplification, the result of the amplification is at very small scale. You need to recycle the energy to keep the amplification on very large scales. That's the key. And I only see feedback to be able to do that.
One more last question back here.
So, Romain, dynamos frequently depend on the Prandtl number and the magnetic Prandtl number. And of course, since you're relying on grid viscosity and reconnection, your Prandtl number is always about 1.
Yes.
So have you thought at all about the implications of that for your work? Because of course, in a real galaxy, it's nowhere near 1.
So that's a very, very good point. So there have been a lot of studies of idealized forced turbulence simulation with varying Prandtl number. And it seems it has an effect on the level of saturation, which is important, whether you saturate at 1%, 10%, or full equipartition. But most of the time, for reasonable quantum number, you still get the dynamo effect.
What's the definition of reasonable?
Going in the right direction. I don't know off the top of my head, but it needs to be larger than something or smaller than something. But I don't know off the top of my head. But yeah, so I think that's fine. So I think for galaxies, the small-scale dynamo, at least in the context of nearby galaxies, is considered as a viable mechanism. So here, the only thing we do is to put this in another context, the high redshift context, which has then, I think, interesting cosmological applications.
All right, let's thank Romain again.
Our next speaker will